Hello, I'm Erica Donnison and I'm a member of the Alexander Studies Online team. Today I'm speaking with Adrian Farrell, who is an Alexander Technique teacher based in London. At Alexander Studies Online, we're going to do a series of interviews with people who combine their Alexander teaching with something else. So another intervention that has health or well-being benefits. And Adrian offers craniosacral therapy alongside his Alexander Technique teaching. So welcome, Adrian.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So if we start with some background, how did you get into the Alexander Technique and craniosacral therapy in the first place, and kind of which came first for you?
So Alexander absolutely came first, and still does for me. So I came to the Alexander Technique through, I used to work in IT, and I had all the usual aches and pains that people in offices get. And I went down all the usual routes. Of course, problem always came back. And I say, of course, to you, but for those that don't know, essentially I was, for want of a better phrase, self-harming with the way I was doing. So it's all very nice to go for a massage or physiotherapy or osteopathy. And, it was always nice for a day or two, and then it would always come back. And then by coincidence, I was at a party and I got talking to this girl who's a ballerina. And I must be boring her stupid about my aches and pains. What was I thinking? She says, have you heard of the Alexander Technique? I was like, no. And she tried to explain poorly, as people generally do. But something stuck in my brain that the following day I did go online and look it up. And I've always forgotten whose website it was, which I really regretted because it's one of the first times I'd seen something about the Alexander Technique that made perfect sense on first reading, which I think you'd probably understand. A lot of people don't, it doesn't make sense on first reading. But there were 2 points that were immediate to me. Firstly, it was something I was doing to myself. And secondly, I can have agency over that. And that really appealed to me personally. So I went for lessons and I absolutely loved them. And that teacher was my teacher, Lynn Neal. She was the one that suggested craniosacral therapy to me. And I loved that as well. So relaxing. But I didn't think anything more about that other than the fact that I really enjoyed it. Alexander was still my interest, even as a student at that point. But then a series of unfortunate events. So 2008, the credit crunch hit, and I lost my job at Merrill Lynch. And then my father, unfortunately, became terminally ill at the same time. And I had to nurse him until he passed. And my plan was to find work again. And I guess, it's one of those life-changing things when you lose your parents. It just makes you think different. I just thought, what the heck? There's actually another element to this story, which I don't normally tell, but I'm going to because my thinking on this is changing over the years. I'm becoming less private about it. But I also developed ME about the same time. And I was unusual that I was diagnosed quickly. And I did, for whatever reason, I already knew something about it. I knew there's no cure. I knew there's nothing you could do about it. So I kind of pivoted and went, okay, I can't go back to work even if I want to now. And I need to do something. So I decided to train. I did worry that my ME might prevent me from training or get in the way. It didn't too much at the time. I just decided just to go for it. And I had initially thought in my own mind I might retrain at some point anyway, because I'd already got that vocational bug. Now, to answer the other question, the craniosacral aspect of it, I only actually did that because I felt kind of guilty at the time that I was taking 3 years off as an adult, bumming around being a student again. And it turned out that the cranial course could be done at the weekend, my AT course during the week. And I just thought it was a nice opportunity. I just did it out of curiosity, really, and a bit of fun, just use the time. Why not? And I didn't at the time have any intention to become a craniosacral therapist as such. I just did it to explore and enjoy, and just try new things while I had the opportunity to do so. But of course, then it affected my AT learning and the way I appreciated it at the time, whether I wanted it to or not, because I did both at the same time. So it was just one big thing, and sometimes it was kind of difficult to pull them apart.
So that nicely leads into the next question, which is what similarities and crossovers are there between the two, in your opinion?
Right, similarities. So before we go with similarities, I'm going to go with the differences.
Okay,
I know
fair
it's not the
enough.
question you asked, but because one is therapy and one is educational.
Yes.
One is passive and one is active.
Hmm.
Hands-on technique being active education, of which craniosacral therapy is passive therapy,
Yeah.
and really just set them apart. But the crossovers happen more by accident, I think. The sort of qualities you want to imbue in yourself as an Alexander teacher to lead by example are very similar to the experience in the human state you find yourself wanting to encourage while you're working with someone with craniosacral therapy.
Hmm.
So I have my view on what craniosacral therapy is. That isn't what the standard model is. And I fought my training all the way through it because something was obviously wrong with the message that's given out. I don't think it's actually got anything to do with cerebral spinal fluid, for example. Not directly. I mean, it's got as much to do with it as any other part of us, really. But there's a quality that we call inhibition in the Alexander technique. We want inhibition in craniosacral therapy as well.
Okay.
So from a practitioner point of view, one works on oneself while you're with a client slash patient. So that's a similarity. There's another one, though, that doesn't really get talked about, as far as I can tell, openly within the Alexander technique community. And this is where I'm going to get into the bit why I don't think the craniosacral model as normally told is correct, because there's a phenomena that happens that I believe, and that I think I've experienced from other teachers, that happens regardless of whether you call it craniosacral therapy or not. And that's an engagement and an entrainment of the nervous system, which is what I actually think craniosacral therapy actually is.
Okay.
I did electronic engineering at university, so this is why I came up with this theory, because I was trying to work out why it works. Because I've been on the receiving end of it. Like, this is lovely, but when they tried to teach me, I'm like, something's not adding up.
Mm.
And then they didn't really like to talk about it. So I started pondering it because I couldn't deny the fact that it worked.
Mm.
I had a problem with the explanation of why it works, or had a problem with the fact that they didn't even want to talk about that they didn't know why it works. If you get two wires and pass a current through them, you get this thing called electrical inductance, where they'll start interacting with each other. It's just a normal electronic physics kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, what's a nervous system other than a kind of a circuit board, a bunch of wires with electricity running through it? Well, the whole of this is run on electricity. Not just the nerves, by the way, but even cells open and close based on potential differences of electricity on either side of the cell that will open and close it to allow things come in and out. So I think my view on what craniosacral therapy is an entrainment of the two nervous systems through bioelectrical inductance, so that you encourage a change in the other person's nervous system, where certain aspects of their nervous system might be stuck in various ways, and it just encourages the change. You can't actually control the change. You can only be a facilitator.
Right.
And then it is more of an art than a science. But other craniosacral therapists have said to me, "Oh, have you read so and so? They think in the same way." I was like, "Oh no, I wasn't aware of that." So I'm not the only one to think this way, to try and understand why. But it means, to a degree, I think there's possibly not a great deal of difference between craniosacral therapy and, say, energy healing or Reiki. I think they broadly fall into the same bracket of a physical phenomena. They're not all tying to some new, unfound physical phenomena with different sort of cultural attitudes and things like that. But why that's relevant to Alexander technique? I think if you've been working as an AT teacher for a long time, and particularly it depends on your personality and the type of teacher you are, those that are more about their inhibition will have spent quiet time with their hands on someone. And if you do that, you just find it happens as a phenomena that your nervous system's entrained. But it takes quite a long time to generate the sensitivity to that. I really struggled with my craniosacral course. It took me weeks. When people were feeling on the first day, I didn't feel any for weeks. I really struggled. But once I started to get a feel for it and sensitivity for it. It just grew and grew until I kind of couldn't turn it off. That if I touched someone, I'd immediately just feel connected in a way that's ineffable, to be honest. And I think many teachers have experienced that because it's just a normal phenomena that can happen between any two people. And I think it might be the basis for, say, historically, Christian laying on hands. I discovered one of my trainers was in America, I think on a Navajo reservation. They were chatting, and he offered the elder some craniosacral work. Don't know how the conversation went, but he was like, sure, that'd be great. And at the end of it, he kind of got up a bit annoyed and went, who taught you Navajo healing? It's just a natural phenomena between two nervous systems.
Yeah.
And I think some teachers develop that, but then don't know how to talk about it. I had two instances of this that made me directly think this was the case while I was training. One was with my head of training, who's Anthony Kingsley. And Anthony always sort of said he worked in a more energetic way, but he'd never really expanded on that. And, you know, that we just had to take that word for what it was, and I didn't really know where he was coming from with it. But one day he had my hand on someone else's back, and he put his hand over the top of mine, and he's guiding me. And I could not make sense of what he said. No, you've got to get him to stay back from you. You've got to get. And the woman was like, I can't. It's like if my hand comes off, I don't want to stay back from me. My hand just comes off. I didn't know what he meant. This connection he was talking about, and I don't know what stage I was. I think I was still early stage learning craniosacral therapy. So I walk away a bit sort of nonplussed and a bit sort of disappointed. Oh, I don't know what that was about. I didn't get it. Walked up to someone, must have been at least in my second year of AT training, which would have been my first year of craniosacral training. And I went, I was like, oh, that's probably what Anthony was talking about. And then sometime, probably not long afterwards, another one of my teachers, Caroline Dale, asked me to put hands on her. She was supposed, you know, she was one of my trainers, and she wanted to see how my hands-on work was going. So put my hands on her. And of course, I don't know if you remember your training. We all hated putting our hands on our trainers. But, oh God! Huge stimulus putting your hands on. Particularly if it's your own head of training. I was like, oh my God, no. Anyway, I did it, and I was getting to the point where I would naturally just start engaging. And she immediately just turned to me and went, yes, that's up. I mean, that's a phrase we say in the Adrian technique to each other, you know, feeling up. And she went, yes. And I was like, that's interesting. Why did she say that? And I think it's because she could sense my sense of up through our in-train engagement. She felt she was being encouraged through my own use. And a similar thing actually happened with one of my fellow trainees. One day, I put hands on him, Ben, and we both shot up immediately. And we both looked at each other. Well, what the heck was that? And it was an entrainment of our nervous systems. Because we're both very up anyway, because we're in the middle of a training school, there tends to be a bit of mirror neuron stuff going on. And you walk into a training school, you suddenly go, whoa, I feel more up than I would have done otherwise. It's kind of contagious, isn't it? But that got me thinking that other teachers experience it, but it's the best kept secret because it's an F4. They don't know how to talk about it, and it's not taught directly. It's more like it's a phenomena that just appears through experience. And that helps you guide people through use because you stay very connected with them as you move them and guide them into, you know, typically sitting and standing. You just become like dance partners, and it's much easier to guide people and for them to have a sense of you being a guide because you're well connected. And I found that invaluable.
You've sort of been talking mainly about the Alexander technique. Tell me more about how that is in craniosacral therapy. So in
craniosacral, you basically take that engagement and deepen it as far as you possibly can.
Okay, right.
So in AT, that quality is, by craniosacral standards, is pretty shallow.
Yeah, low level.
Yeah.
So the difference being perhaps that in AT we're perhaps taking it into movement, whereas in CST you're not. You're deepening, and you want somebody to, I don't know.
Yeah. So you're really trying to get their own nervous system to change.
Yeah. And
elicit change. And you can kind of do that a bit with table turns. You know, when we give a table turn, we get people very quiet. And you can. In craniosacral therapy, you take that quality and you just go as deep as you can with it. So you feel deeply engaged with someone. And it's quite a wonderful experience from a practitioner point of view, that you can have someone you've never met before. And you may not actually feel on first meeting, you click as such. You start working with them on the table doing craniosacral therapy. After all, you get halfway through the session, like, oh, I love this person. It seems to just cut through boundaries and stuff. And you just really feel really nicely connected and together, and offering something that, you know, a catalyst for change, to be a facilitator, and you're both sort of present to it. It's kind of a shared experience, although as though it's a shared experience, they are kind of different experiences for each person. Because for starters, the patient might often fall asleep,
Yeah.
which is fine. Yeah, if I hear my patient snore, I'm actually usually quite happy. That means they've really down-regulated.
Yes.
So if I hear an AT student snore, I'm not so happy.
Yeah. Yes, quite.
But the craniosacral, I'm very happy. It shows just how down-regulated they've
Yeah.
become.
Yeah. They've gone
Which of course
deeper.
we want an AT as well, but we want them to be conscious
Yeah.
down-regulated.
Yeah.
That's not an issue with craniosacral.
No.
So yeah, that's the difference. Is if I've had that feeling in my hands with an AT student, it's fairly shallow stuff, and it's not necessary either. It's
Yeah.
a nice
Yeah.
to have.
That's not what we're trying to do.
But I'm pretty convinced that there are a number of teachers that have experienced it, and we just don't talk about it. I certainly think Anthony Kingsley potentially works that way. He may not explain it that way, but he's got a feeling in his hands that he knows that he feels connected. The language he's used to me in the past when I was training, it made me think that anyway.
Right. Yeah. So your interpretation of what he was saying and you were feeling. And,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because over the years I've come to the conclusion that it's just a natural phenomena, I'm of the conclusion of why wouldn't it happen actually?
Yeah. Fair enough.
If the circumstances are present to allow it to happen, why wouldn't it happen?
But I guess it's how aware we are as teachers of what's happening, and that may be not something that a particular Alexander teacher is interested in, if you like. It may not be where they want to go with it, and yet for some it may be happening, as you say, without them really being able to put words to it.
It's quietly accepting it as a personal experience.
It's just how you work. I mean, I guess you don't. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? We don't know what other teachers are. I mean, this is really interesting talking about it, and I'm hoping that people who watch this will come up with their own comments on the comments thingy, or contact you direct and say yes or no, or this is my experience.
Yeah, I would be intrigued, if there are teachers, particularly those that really work quietly with inhibition.
But I wonder whether there was something else you wanted to say more specifically.
Yeah, sure. So, because I did both at the same time, I just didn't know any difference. And so it's just the way I was. It was the new me. So, and I didn't go out of my way to look for that nice engagement. It would just happen because I was doing so much of it at the time. Because you've got your daily Alexander studies at school, and then although the craniosacral course was 3 weekends a term, you had to practice with your fellow students in between. So I was doing it a lot. So it was so intense period that it just all came together as one big thing. So I put my hands on someone, and I just get this engagement. And that was that. I couldn't not do it in a way. So when I first graduated from both at the same time, coincidentally, and I went out to do this professionally, that's what I did. But also, I don't know if you remember when you first graduated, we're not really taught to explain what we're doing huge amounts on an Alexander course. We're kind of given a physical hands-on skill set, and we kind of work with magic hands. I keep doing the finger thing, sorry, it's annoying afterwards. But the whole magic hands thing. And I had super magic hands because of the cranial as well. So I was just quietly working with people, guiding them around, working on the table in this very non-verbal way. Partly because of my personality, I like to explain things. But there were 2 specific things that changed the way I did AT in relation to craniosacral. And the first was I had surgery to remove my right kidney, which had a tumor, and I completely lost my ability to do craniosacral therapy. It just went. And I didn't get it back for over a year.
Oh, wow.
I just could not tune in. It was quite shocking. Now, I slowly but surely got it back, but I kind of got used to working without it. So I found, I had a new habitual way of teaching, that I didn't need it anymore. And I found myself during that time explaining things a little more anyway, but then lockdown happened. I basically thought I'm either going to be broke very quickly or I'm going to have to see if I can do what some teachers have been doing for a while and teach online, which meant I had to learn to basically talk about the work and talk about observations and talking about giving people actionable activities and to then make self-observations about that. So after, lockdowns and everything, I very much developed ways of communicating verbally that I hadn't been able to do so strongly before, because we were so reliant on hands. So when we came back out of lockdown, that seemed to become my new habit, teaching. I was a lot more descriptive and gave a lot more explanations than I used to when I first started. And I often found people gravitated towards me who had lessons before from one of a better description for more non-verbal teachers. They said it felt great. I loved it. I didn't understand it. Didn't know how to apply it to myself. This is really weird fine line, grey area in Alexander's technique where you go, are you really being a teacher or are you being a therapist? And I never wanted to be a therapist. I wanted to be a teacher. So that kind of changed my thinking, like more verbal, a little more mechanical with my hands, but slowly, surely it all started to come back. I realized that I wanted to bring back that touch sensation of being connected. I wanted it back because I realized there's something you can communicate through hands-on that you can't always communicate verbally. So of late, I've started making more of an effort to actually maybe slow down a bit to encourage the engagement. I'm not as quick as I used to be with that engaged craniosacral touch. It doesn't come as quick as it used to.
Right.
Partly, I think, because of that experience of surgery. And I think it might be partly, I think it's probably my nervous system went into shock from having surgery. And partly because I changed my tune about what I thought teaching meant and what the Alexander technique meant to me. We can find it very difficult to explain what we're doing at Alexander technique. So just come and have an experience. Well, no, if I can't make my case without putting my hands on you, I can't be very clear in my own thinking about what I'm doing. And that became an ideological point for me, that I really wanted to be clear in my thinking. I have to say, the teaching online, I think I learned more about the Alexander technique in that year of lockdown than I had in the previous sort of 10 years of teaching in some respects. It got something really clear in my mind. I kind of used to go through that, and now I've kind of come back out the other side.
In craniosacral work, there is no speaking. At least my experience of it is that it's all terribly quiet.
And I tend to find with a new AT client, because the first few sessions, I like to get to know someone and just feel there's a bit of rapport. Yeah. Rather than just stick them on the table and not say anything to them for the next half hour, 45 minutes, and then send them on their way. They're a bit amused, Yeah. I like to get clear about what we're doing academically. But after the first session or two, and we getting them to know each other out of the way, I find sessions tend to get quieter anyway, and then I will start to maybe go out my way to develop that specific touch and tune into it with strong inhibition, strong quietness, which then leads to very nice movement in and out of the chair.
Well, yeah, but that's very different, isn't it? Because if you've got somebody coming to you for craniosacral therapy, they're straight on the table, get comfortable.
Yeah. I usually talk to someone for a bit before I put them on the table. Yeah. If you give them the chance to talk, it makes things come alive in them that's present, the things that are bothering them. It just brings them to the surface of their nervous system and their awareness. So that when you're working on them, that's the thing that's kind of bubbling away that you're working on as well. Yeah. So I find that very important, to give people an opportunity to express these things verbally, because it just kind of brings it up within their nervous system as a whole. Yeah. But then it's just quietness. Yeah. And I generally find, so the question you would probably ask me earlier was, but why would I do one over the other? Why do people come for me to one over the other? That was the question I was about to ask you. Although I'm pretty rubbish with my marketing on the craniosacral, because I'm so focused on the Alexander technique, because that's my real vocation. But I always have at least one week craniosacral. And the difference tends to be, not always, but tends to be, that people that come from craniosacral therapy, it tends to be more for emotional and stress-related reasons. Oh, okay. Rather than physical. Yeah. So you think they're looking for that space and that quietness? They're just not always, but that is a theme. Whereas Alexander people tend to come for more obvious musculoskeletal issues. Now there is actually a middle ground for both of them. Yeah. Now, because of my AT background, if something is more musculoskeletal in nature, I will try to convert them. And even if they come for cranial, I'll sometimes want to assess them anyway from an Alexander perspective. I might do 5 minutes of chair work, just observing their movement patterns in and out of a chair, see where the reactions are, where the muscle tensionings and discoordination happen, just to get a feel for what I think's going on. And sometimes I'll convert them to AT. Sometimes I'll say, no, I think you're right. This, although you've got some musculoskeletal issues here, I think they're because they're deeply embedded stress responses, and I'll stick with craniosacral.
Yeah. And
sometimes I do a bit of both. That's more likely to happen if they come from craniosacral, but I feel they could do some AT as well. So I'll give them a craniosacral turn first, and then I'll say I'm just switching into AT mode, and I'll start giving them. I'll say, so you can start slowly waking up, but I want you to not do anything. Just let me move you, and your job is just to allow. And I'll start sort of releasing more in a slightly more mechanical way, just with shoulders and legs and hips and stuff, head-neck relationship, just all that AT stuff that we do. But it's still very quiet. But that's a really nice time to do some Alexander work, and they've been nicely cranial before, and I'm still in cranial mode. So I'm doing I love that when I'm in. I've just done the proper cranial session. I'm nicely tuned in, and then I turn it into an Alexander table turn, but I'm still engaged in the cranial way. And that's a lovely thing, because it really encourages a sort of a release in a different way that I can't get if I don't do it in quite a deep level. And then I can get them up, and I'll do a bit of chair work, still be able to guide them in that nice way. This doesn't tend to happen so much the other way around from an AT client perspective, but I do it occasionally if I feel there is either sometimes if I feel like their neck just isn't free, for no other reason, they're just really solid, I'll do a little cranial through there, and I'll warn them first or second, so do you mind me answering? So but that doesn't tend to happen as much.
No, I was just going to say, I would see that would be a really nice way to come out of a craniosacral session, because it, again, from my experience, you can get up having been in that place and you're just a bit actually, you're bringing that consciousness into your body. You're coming back to yourself and starting to allow the movement to happen. Then I can see that could work really well.
And sometimes with some very long-standing clients, be a bit more traditional. I find when I say traditional AT, that quiet table turn kind of thing, I will find the cranial thing comes in, and I start to sometimes almost feel a bit guilty. Like, what am I doing here? Am I doing cranial on them, or am I doing AT on them? And I get a bit confused. And what I find when that happens is I just choose not to spend too long anywhere. Instead of bedding in, I just choose to move on.
Really interesting. Thank you so much. As usual with these things, we will have a link to your website, and there is the comment section. And so please, anyone who's watching, please put comments on and we will reply. So thank you ever so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.